Afghanistan is back in the headlines, but this time not because of the Taliban. In September 2025, US President Donald Trump made a dramatic statement that the United States should take back Bagram Airbase. That one line sent chills through Washington, Beijing, Islamabad and Tehran, because if you've heard the name Bagram, you know it isn't just any runway. It's a place that once gave America serious reach across the region. When America withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021 and handed Bagram to the Taliban, many said it marked the end of US influence in the region. But why is this airbase so important? In this video, we will look at where Bagram sits, what it once allowed the US to do, and why its return would shake more than just Afghanistan. We'll also ask a bigger question. If America could regain Bagram today, how would it change the balance of power across Asia and beyond? And also, can America really take back the control of Bagram Airbase? Stay with me because what you're about to see may change how you think about this base forever. Let's start with the geography. Bagram Airbase sits just 40 kilometers north of Kabul, in the Parwan province of Afghanistan, nestled against the foothills of the Hindu Kush Mountains. On paper, it's just an airport. In reality, its location is a geopolitical goldmine. Draw a circle around Bagram with a 1,500-kilometer radius. Inside that circle, you will cover western China, including the sensitive Xinjiang region, parts of Iran, most of Pakistan, and the heart of Central Asia. Stretch it slightly further, and you will even have Moscow's sphere of influence. This is the reach of Bagram Airbase. It was the biggest US base in Afghanistan, capable of hosting tens of thousands of troops. It had 2 runways, each over 3,000 meters long, enough for heavy bombers like the B-52 or cargo aircraft like the C-17. For America, this wasn't just another base, it was the gateway into Eurasia, sitting right at the intersection of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, some of the most contested borders in the world. Bagram's story stretches back decades. Originally built by the Soviets in the 1950s, it became a hub during their invasion of Afghanistan in the 1980s. Soviet fighters, bombers, and helicopters flew countless missions from Bagram to crush the Afghan resistance. When the United States invaded Afghanistan in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks, Bagram quickly became America's crown jewel. The US expanded it massively, transforming it into a fortress city. At its peak, Bagram could house over 40,000 personnel. It was the nerve center of America's war on terror, hosting drone operations, intelligence missions, and special forces deployments across the region. Bagram wasn't just a military hub, it became a symbol. For Afghans, it was often seen as the embodiment of US occupation. For Washington, it was proof that America could project its power deep into Asia. But in August 2021, when the US withdrew chaotically from Afghanistan, the sudden abandonment of Bagram marked a dramatic turning point. The Taliban rolled in, and one of the most strategic air bases in the world changed hands without a fight. And analysts worldwide said that America just gave away a fortress. But why is this base so important, really? The first reason, its logistics power. Bagram acted like a giant hub, storing ammunition, fuel, medical facilities, and spare parts. The 2 long runways let heavy cargo planes land in bad weather and at night, so supplies kept moving, even when roads were unsafe. It allowed the US to sustain long-term operations in one of the most difficult regions on Earth. Second reason is intelligence dominance. From Bagram, America could launch ISR missions, which stand for Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance Missions. Drones, satellites and radar stations collected data over Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and even parts of Western China. The base became a nerve center for cyber and electronic warfare, giving the Pentagon eyes and ears across Asia. Third reason is the symbolic value. Bagram wasn't just concrete and runways, it was a message that the US is here, at the doorstep of its rivals. It was a statement that the United States could project power deep into Central Asia and stay there. Its fall in 2021 wasn't just about Afghanistan, it was seen as a blow to American credibility worldwide. Now let's imagine that America regains control of Bagram. Who do you think would be worried the most? Without a doubt, it would be China. Bagram lies only about 1,200 kilometers from China's Xinjiang province. This is the region where Beijing faces its most sensitive issue, which is the Uyghur population and fears of separatism. From a base like Bagram, American drones, spy planes, and listening posts could track troop movements, watch training areas, and monitor rail and road traffic along China's western borders. And then there's another layer to this. Western China is home to key missile and nuclear-related facilities, including test ranges and support sites tied to the PLA rocket force. Being so close gives the US better angles to watch missile units moving, observe exercises, and collect signals around missile command and control. It also improves the ability to monitor activity near sites like Lop Nur, where China historically conducted nuclear tests, and to follow long-range missile corridors across the desert. In short, Bagram would sharpen America's picture of China's nuclear and missile posture in the West. This base would also threaten China's Belt and Road Initiative. Beijing has invested heavily in Afghanistan, planning road, rail, and mining projects. But if US forces are back in Bagram, those projects would suddenly look vulnerable. If we look at a bigger picture, China already feels surrounded, with US bases in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Guam, and the Indian Ocean. Regaining Bagram would add a western flank, turning that arc into more of a ring. So for Beijing, a US flag flying again at Bagram would not just be a headline, it would feel like a spotlight on its most guarded region, its western military districts, its Belt and Road gateways, and parts of its nuclear and missile infrastructure. And all of this is far closer than its comfort zone. For Pakistan, a US return to Bagram would bring mixed consequences. On one hand, relations with the Afghan Taliban have soured sharply. Islamabad has pushed hundreds of thousands of Afghan migrants back and adopted a tougher line after repeated attacks inside Pakistan that it links to groups operating from Afghan soil, especially the TTP. Border crossings at Torkham and Chaman have been shut or restricted multiple times. Fencing and checkpoints have been reinforced, and the two sides have even traded fire along the frontier. In this climate, a US footprint at Bagram could pressure the Taliban to restrain militants and tighten the border, which, from Pakistan's security view, is a short-term plus. On the other hand, it would also cut into Pakistan's leverage. For years, Islamabad acted as a bridge between Washington and Kabul. If the US is back inside Afghanistan, that role shrinks. A US base so close would also bring much stronger surveillance over the Durand Line, cross-border militant networks, and smuggling routes, but these actions would also be uncomfortable for a state that prefers to manage these files quietly. It would also create domestic political heat, as any visible US military return next door would inflame anti-American sentiment and complicate Pakistan's own balancing between China, the Gulf, and the West. Then there is another risk. The Taliban might push back by tightening screws on Pakistan or playing both sides. For example, by promising cooperation to Washington while looking the other way with factions that hurt Pakistan. That would undercut Islamabad's influence and make day-to-day border management even harder. And if tensions spike, CPEC arteries in the northwest, like roads, tunnels, and energy links that touch the Afghan frontier, could face more security disruption. So for Pakistan, Bagram's return is not purely a nightmare and not purely a win. It could help suppress cross-border militancy in the short run, but it would also reduce Pakistan's diplomatic leverage, stoke domestic backlash, and add pressure to an already tense border and economy. For Iran, a US return to Bagram would feel like new pressure from the east, the one direction Tehran has usually worried about the least. Most of Iran's air defenses and military planning focus on the Persian Gulf and Israel-facing front, and not on the long, sparsely populated border with Afghanistan and Pakistan. If US forces were back at Bagram, Iran would suddenly have to watch that eastern flank much more closely. Bagram sits within reach of Sistano-Baluchistan and South Khorasan, provinces where Iran already struggles with smuggling, insurgent activity, and border security. From there, US drones, reconnaissance planes, and electronic listening gear could track movements along Iran's eastern highways and rail lines, monitor military drills and missile units. It would also sharpen US visibility on Iran's broader weapons strategy. Politically, the timing of this comeback would sting Iran because Tehran has tried to build a working relationship with the Taliban, despite water disputes on the Helmand River and occasional border clashes. A US presence next door would complicate that fragile balance. Economically and strategically, Iran has been deepening ties with Russia and China and courting investment in Chabahar port and east-west transit routes. A US base at Bagram would make foreign investors and insurers more cautious about projects running through eastern Iran and western Afghanistan. That might not stop commerce, but it would raise costs and risks, which is exactly what Tehran wants to avoid as sanctions continue to bite. Militarily, Iran's response would be predictable. It would move more radars east, add mobile air defense batteries, and fly more drone patrols along the border. It would also tighten cooperation with Moscow and Beijing. So Bagram in US would open a new window into Iran's backyard and would add fresh uncertainty to Iran's plans with Russia, China, and regional trade corridors. Now, if we talk about Russia, Central Asia has always been its backyard. Moscow sees itself as the main security provider in countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. It keeps troops at the 201st Military Base in Tajikistan, runs an airbase at Kant in Kyrgyzstan, and leads the CSTO security bloc. If the US came back to Bagram, that whole picture would look less certain. Russia is already stretched by the war in Ukraine. It has fewer spare forces, less money, and limited bandwidth for new problems. A visible US footprint in Afghanistan would make Moscow worry about encirclement from the south, not just from NATO in the west. It would also put high-end US surveillance operations much closer to Russia's southern military districts and to supply routes that run from Central Asia into Russia. There is also the memory factor. The Soviet failure in Afghanistan still stings. Seeing the US back at Bagram would be more than uncomfortable. It would be symbolically humiliating and strategically risky. Moscow's influence in Central Asia has already been eroding. China has poured in money, trade, and security ties, and regional states are hedging more than before. If the US re-enters via Bagram, Russia would face two great power competitors in the same space, China with money and America with military reach. That combination weakens Russia's traditional role as the go-to security provider. There is also a counter-terrorism angle. Russia worries about jihadist spillover from Afghanistan into Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, drug trafficking along the northern route, and the safety of millions of Central Asian migrant workers inside Russia. If the US is back at Bagram, Moscow will argue that it needs even tighter control along the Afghan border, more joint patrols with Tajik forces, and faster intelligence exchanges, all tools that keep Russia embedded in the region's security services. On the economic map, a US return would complicate Moscow's push for north-south corridors with Iran and for steady trade through Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Extra tension in Afghanistan would raise insurance costs, slow rail and road projects, and make investors cautious. All of this is bad for Russia's effort to bypass Western routes and sanctions. And these consequences won't just stop at Asia. For NATO also, it would signal that Washington is reasserting itself after years of retreat. It could reassure allies in Europe and Asia that America is back in the game. For the Middle East, a US base in Afghanistan would reduce dependence on Gulf bases, giving Washington more flexibility in crises. And globally, it would mark the return of America's ability to project power deep into Eurasia, the very heart of the world that was always regarded as the key to global dominance. But here's the catch. Regaining Bagram isn't as simple as it sounds. Today, Afghanistan is under Taliban control, and they are not giving a US base a green light, not without a total change of regime, which would mean a new war. That alone makes the political cost enormous. There are more roadblocks. Overflight rights would be a headache. To supply Bagram, US planes would need corridors over countries like Pakistan, Iran, or Central Asian states, all of whom would demand a price. Logistics would be tough too. Bagram worked in the past because the US had a whole network behind it. Contracts, convoys, and cooperative governments. That network no longer exists. Domestic politics matter as well. After 2 decades in Afghanistan, there is little appetite in the US for sending troops back, and allies would be cautious. NATO partners might share intelligence or airlift, but few would line up for a new Afghan deployment. On the ground, the security risk is high. ISIS Khorasan remains active, and any visible US footprint would be a target from day one. So is it really impossible for US to take back Bagram? Practically yes, unless something fundamental changes inside Afghanistan or the region. But here's why the idea still matters, and that is the signal it gives. Even floating a return to Bagram makes other capitals recalculate. Beijing thinks harder about Xinjiang and Belt and Road routes through the Wakhan. Tehran worries about an exposed eastern flank. Moscow sees pressure creeping back into Central Asia, and Islamabad rethinks border policy and its leverage over the Taliban. In short, boots back at Bagram are unlikely, but the possibility of it may change behavior. If America really reclaims Bagram, the world could see a new era of US power projection, but it could also push Asia closer to a new Cold War, with Afghanistan once again at the center of global rivalry. If you like this analysis, do like and share this with others. Take care.